I never thought my own brother would choose someone he'd known for 6 months over his own flesh and blood. But there I was, staring at my phone in complete disbelief, reading the text message that would change everything between us forever. "Hey Maya, I need to talk to you about the wedding. Victoria and I have been discussing the guest list, and we've decided to make some changes. With her position in Congress, we need to be more selective about optics. I'm sorry, but we're going to have to uninvite you from the wedding party. You'll still be invited to the ceremony, of course, but Victoria thinks it's best if you're not a bridesmaid anymore." I read it 3 times, then 4. Then I just sat there on my apartment couch, my hands shaking, wondering if this was some kind of cruel joke. My brother Marcus and I had been close our entire lives. We'd grown up in a modest household in Baltimore, raised by our single mother who worked 2 jobs to keep us fed and in decent schools. Marcus was 4 years older than me, and he'd always been my protector, my champion, my biggest supporter. When I got my PhD in American history at 28, he'd been the first person to congratulate me. When I landed my dream job as the Senior Curator of American Political History at the Smithsonian's National Museum of American History 2 years ago, he'd taken me out for the most expensive dinner he could afford and told me how proud he was. And now, because of some woman he'd met at a political fundraiser half a year ago, I was being demoted from bridesmaid to regular guest. Not even uninvited entirely, just pushed to the sidelines like I was an embarrassment. Called him immediately. My hands were still trembling as I pressed his name in my contacts. "Maya, I knew you'd call," Marcus answered, his voice tired. "Look, before you get upset." "Before I get upset," I interrupted, my voice rising. "Marcus, you just uninvited me from your wedding party via text message. I think I'm entitled to be upset." "You're not uninvited from the wedding," he corrected, as if that made it better. "You're just not going to be a bridesmaid. Victoria has very specific ideas about how she wants the wedding to look, and with all the media attention." Media attention for a wedding? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Marcus, she's a freshman congresswoman from a safe district in Connecticut. She's not exactly a household name." There was a long pause. When Marcus spoke again, his voice had an edge to it that I'd never heard directed at me before. "Victoria is going places, Maya. She's already being talked about as a future leader in the party. This wedding is going to be covered by several major publications. We need everything to be perfect. And I'm not perfect enough." The words came out smaller than I intended, the hurt seeping through despite my best efforts to sound angry instead of wounded. "It's not like that," Marcus said, but he didn't sound convincing. "It's just, Victoria comes from a very prominent family. Her bridesmaids are all women who move in certain circles. There's a daughter of a senator, 2 Ivy League lawyers, and Victoria's sister who's a television correspondent. The optics need to be right." "The optics." I repeated the word like it was something foul I'd found in my mouth. "I have a PhD from Georgetown, Marcus. I'm the Senior Curator at one of the most prestigious museums in the world. What exactly about me doesn't fit your precious optics?" Another pause. This one was even longer. "Victoria saw your social media," he finally said. "Some of your posts are, let's just say they don't align with the image we're trying to project." I nearly dropped my phone. "My social media? Marcus, I post about historical exhibits and museum events. What could possibly be controversial about that?" "You've been very vocal about certain political issues," he said carefully. "Your posts about the revisionist interpretations of the Reconstruction era, your threads about indigenous representation in American museums, that whole thing you did about Confederate monuments last year. That's my job." I was standing now, pacing my small living room. "I'm a historian. I literally curate exhibits about American political history. Of course I have opinions about how we present that history." "Well, Victoria finds some of your opinions problematic. She thinks they're too divisive. Too radical." "Radical?" I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Stating historical facts is radical now. Advocating for accurate representation of marginalized communities in our national narrative is divisive. You're twisting my words, Marcus said, his voice getting defensive. Look, this is Victoria's day. She gets to decide who she wants standing up with her. I'm just asking you to respect that. Victoria's day, I echoed. What about you, Marcus? Don't you get a say in your own wedding? Don't I get any consideration as your sister? Of course you do. That's why you're still invited to the ceremony. Maya, please don't make this harder than it needs to be. I love Victoria. I'm going to marry her. I need you to accept that and support us. I would support you, I said, tears now streaming down my face. I have been supporting you. I was excited to be your bridesmaid, Marcus. I already bought the dress. I was planning your bachelor party. And now you're throwing me aside because your fiancé doesn't like that I tell the truth about American history. You're being dramatic. Don't. My voice came out sharp and cold. Don't you dare tell me I'm being dramatic. You chose her over me. You've known me your entire life, and you've known her for 6 months, and you chose her. Maya, I need to go, I said, my voice breaking. I can't do this right now. I hung up before he could respond. Then I turned off my phone, went to my bedroom, and cried harder than I had since our mother died 5 years ago. The next few weeks were brutal. Marcus tried calling several times, but I couldn't bring myself to answer. He sent texts apologizing for how he'd handled things, but never actually taking back what he'd done. He wanted me to understand, to accept Victoria's decision, to just go along with being demoted in my own brother's wedding. I threw myself into work. It was early March, and we were in the planning stages for a major exhibit on the history of civil rights legislation that would open in the fall. I spent 12-hour days at the museum, losing myself in primary sources and artifact authentication. At least dead people and historical documents couldn't suddenly decide I wasn't good enough for them. It was during one of these late nights, nearly 3 weeks after the text message, that I finally met Victoria Hayes in person. I was in my office, surrounded by archival photographs and draft exhibit descriptions, when my assistant director knocked on my open door. Maya, I'm sorry to interrupt, Jennifer said, looking slightly flustered. But there's a Congresswoman Victoria Hayes here asking to see you. She doesn't have an appointment, but she says it's personal. My stomach dropped. Of course she would show up here. Of course she couldn't just leave well enough alone. Send her in, I said, straightening my spine and smoothing down my blouse. If Victoria Hayes wanted to have this conversation at my workplace, fine. But she was on my turf now. Victoria walked in moments later, and I had to admit, she looked every inch the rising political star. She was tall, blonde, and polished in a way that probably cost thousands of dollars to maintain. Her suit was designer, her jewelry understated but clearly expensive, her smile practiced and perfect. Dr. Chen, she said, extending her hand. It's so wonderful to finally meet you. Marcus has told me so much about you. I shook her hand briefly, not bothering to return the smile. Congresswoman Hayes. This is unexpected. Please call me Victoria. She settled into the chair across from my desk without being invited, crossing her legs gracefully. I know Marcus spoke with you about the wedding arrangements, and I wanted to reach out personally. I felt like there might have been some miscommunication. The communication seemed pretty clear to me, I said, keeping my voice professional. You don't want me as a bridesmaid because my historically accurate social media posts don't fit your political brand. Victoria's smile never wavered, but something cold flashed in her eyes. I can see Marcus didn't explain it as delicately as I would have. Dr. Chen, Maya, you have to understand I'm in a very visible position. Everything about my life is scrutinized. My wedding will be featured in several publications. The people standing up with me represent not just my personal relationships, but my professional judgment. And you think I would reflect poorly on your professional judgment? I think, Victoria said carefully, that your very vocal positions on certain sensitive historical topics could be misconstrued. I've read your articles, your social media threads. You have a tendency to be quite aggressive in your interpretations of American history. I'm a historian, I said flatly. I deal in facts, not interpretations convenient to modern political sensibilities. Exactly. Victoria leaned forward slightly. And that's admirable in an academic setting. But in my world, perception is reality. I can't have someone in my wedding party who's written articles questioning the traditional narrative of American exceptionalism, who's argued for the removal of Confederate monuments, who's criticized the way we teach the Founding Fathers in schools. Those aren't radical positions, I said, my voice rising slightly despite my best efforts to stay calm. Those are mainstream historical perspectives supported by decades of scholarship. In academic circles, perhaps. But to the average voter, to the media, it looks like I'm endorsing a very specific political ideology. And right now, I need to appeal to a broader base than that. I stared at her for a long moment, truly seeing her for the first time. This wasn't about the wedding at all. This was about Victoria establishing dominance, making sure I knew my place in her new life with my brother. Does Marcus know you're here? Yes. Marcus knows I wanted to smooth things over with you. He's very concerned about your relationship. If he's so concerned, he could have not uninvited me from his wedding party. Victoria sighed, and for the first time, her polished veneer cracked slightly. Look, I'm trying to be diplomatic here, but let me be frank. Marcus and I are building a life together. A very specific kind of life with very specific demands and expectations. I need a partner who can support that without complication. And I need people around us who understand the game we're playing. The game, I repeated, my voice hollow. Politics is a game, Dr. Chen. You may not like that, but it's the truth. And Marcus has chosen to play that game with me. That means making certain sacrifices, certain adjustments. He understands that. I need you to understand it too. What I understand, I said, standing up, is that you've known my brother for 6 months and you think you can rewrite his entire life to suit your ambitions. What I understand is that you're so insecure in your own position that you see a museum curator as a threat to your image. What I understand is that you're not good enough for Marcus, and deep down I think you know it. Victoria stood as well, her face flushing slightly. I came here to extend an olive branch. I can see that was a mistake. The mistake was thinking you could come to my workplace and explain to me why I'm not worthy of standing up at my own brother's wedding. I may not have your political connections or your family money, but I have something you'll never have. I actually earned my position through merit and hard work, not through Daddy's connections and a trust fund. I regretted the words the moment they left my mouth. It was petty and beneath me. But Victoria's face went very still, and I knew I'd struck a nerve. I'll see myself out, she said coldly. I hope for Marcus's sake that you can find a way to be civil at the wedding. But I understand now why he was hesitant about including you in the wedding party. You're clearly not capable of putting aside your personal feelings for the sake of family harmony. She left, her heels clicking sharply against the floor. I sank back into my chair, my heart pounding, knowing I just made everything so much worse. Marcus called me that night. I almost didn't answer, but I knew I had to face the music eventually. Maya, what the hell? He said before I could even say hello. Victoria just told me about your conversation. How could you say those things to her? She showed up at my workplace uninvited, Marcus. She came there to put me in my place, to make sure I understood that I wasn't good enough for her wedding. She was trying to make peace. She felt bad about how things were handled, and she wanted to explain things to you personally. And you attacked her. I defended myself, I shot back. She basically told me I was an embarrassment to her political career. That my work as a historian was too controversial for her precious image. She didn't say that. She absolutely said that. Marcus, when did you become okay with this? When did you become someone who cares more about political optics than about your own sister? That's not fair, he said, his voice strained. I'm trying to build a future here, Maya. Victoria and we could really be something. She could be in the Senate someday, maybe even higher. Do you know what kind of opportunities that could create? Not just for us, but for the causes we care about. What causes? I asked bitterly. What exactly does Victoria Hayes care about besides her own advancement? She cares about education reform, healthcare access, economic development, which are all very popular, very safe positions that poll well with suburban moderates. Has she ever taken a stand on anything remotely controversial? Ever risked her political capital for something that actually matters? Not everyone has to be a radical to make a difference, Marcus said, and there was real anger in his voice now. Some of us understand that you need power before you can use it. That you need to win elections before you can change things. And some of us understand that if you compromise everything you believe in to gain power, you'll have nothing left to fight for once you have it. There was a long silence on the line. I don't even know who you are anymore, Marcus said finally. His voice quiet and sad. The Maya I knew would be happy for me. Would support me even if she didn't agree with all my choices. The Marcus I knew wouldn't have uninvited his sister from his wedding for a woman he barely knows, I replied, my own voice breaking. The Marcus I knew wouldn't have chosen political ambition over family. Maybe we're both different than we used to be, he said. Maybe we've both changed. Maybe we have. He hung up without saying goodbye. I sat there in my apartment, phone in hand, and wondered how everything had gone so wrong so fast. Despite everything, I received a formal wedding invitation 6 weeks later. It arrived in a cream-colored envelope with elegant calligraphy, probably costing more per invite than most people spent on their entire wedding budget. The ceremony would be held at Victoria's family estate in Connecticut, followed by a reception in the estate's gardens. Black tie required. No +1s unless specifically indicated on the invitation. Mine, of course, didn't include a +1. I stared at that invitation for 3 days, trying to decide what to do. Part of me wanted to RSVP no, to make a clean break and let Marcus live his new life without the embarrassment of his radical historian sister. But another part of me, the part that remembered Marcus teaching me to ride a bike and helping me with my homework and holding me while I cried at our mother's funeral, couldn't let go that easily. In the end, I sent back the RSVP card with "accepts with pleasure" checked off. It was a lie, but it was a necessary one. He was still my brother, even if I didn't recognize him anymore. Even if he'd chosen someone who saw me as a liability rather than an asset. The wedding was scheduled for the last Saturday in May, which gave me just over 2 months to prepare myself emotionally for what would undoubtedly be one of the most painful days of my life. I threw myself even deeper into work. The civil rights exhibit was coming together beautifully, but I'd also started preliminary planning for another project that had been percolating in my mind for years. A comprehensive exhibit on the role of women in American political history, from the suffragettes through to modern congresswomen and senators. It was while researching this potential exhibit that I first came across something interesting about Victoria Hayes's family history. Her great-great-grandfather, Augustus Hayes, had been a congressman in the 1920s. There were some interesting archival materials about him in our collection, including some correspondence with other political figures of the era. I started pulling those materials, initially just out of professional curiosity. But the more I read, the more fascinating it became. Augustus Hayes had been quite the character, a staunch opponent of women's suffrage, a vocal segregationist, and someone who had used his political position to advance his family's considerable business interests in ways that were questionable even by the standards of the time. I filed that information away in my mind, not sure what to do with it. It wasn't Victoria's fault that her ancestor had been on the wrong side of history. Plenty of prominent American families had skeletons in their closets. It wasn't my place to judge her for her lineage. But I couldn't help noticing that Victoria's official biography, the one on her congressional website and in all her campaign materials, made much of her family's long history of public service, without mentioning any of the more problematic details of that service. As the wedding approached, I started receiving increasingly pointed messages from Marcus about proper behavior and expectations. Nothing explicitly rude, but the subtext was clear. Don't embarrass him. Don't make waves. Don't be yourself. 3 weeks before the wedding, he sent me a list of topics I should avoid discussing at the reception. Victoria's parents are very traditional, he explained over the phone when I called to ask if he was serious. Just don't bring up anything controversial. No politics, no religion, no social issues. Marcus, I'm a historian. My entire profession is politics and social issues. Then talk about something else. Talk about the weather. Talk about the food. Just don't start any debates about systemic racism or gender inequality or whatever hot-button issue you're focused on this week. Whatever hot-button issue I'm focused on this week, I repeated slowly. Is that really how you see my work? As me just jumping from one controversy to another? He sighed. I didn't mean it like that. I'm just stressed, okay? This wedding is important. There are going to be some very important people there. Senators, major donors, media personalities. I need everything to go smoothly. I'm not going to sabotage your wedding, Marcus. I know you won't mean to, he said, and the condescension in his voice made my blood boil. But you have a tendency to be very passionate about your beliefs. Sometimes to the point where you don't read the room. So now I'm socially inept as well as politically radical. Maya, please. I'm not trying to insult you. I'm just trying to prepare you for what this event is going to be like. It's not going to be like the weddings we went to growing up. This is going to be a very high-profile, very carefully orchestrated event. Victoria has been planning every detail for months. I'm sure she has, I said dryly. Heaven forbid anything happens spontaneously or authentically. See that right there? That attitude. That's exactly what I'm worried about. Then maybe you shouldn't have invited me at all, I snapped. If I'm such a liability, such an embarrassment, why even have me there? Because you're my sister, he said, his voice softening slightly. And despite everything, I want you there. I want you to see me get married. I want you to be part of this day, even if it's not in the way we originally planned. It was the first genuinely kind thing he'd said to me in months. I felt my anger deflate slightly. I'll be on my best behavior, I promised. I'll smile and make small talk and not bring up anything more controversial than the weather. Thank you, he said, sounding relieved. That's all I'm asking. But as I hung up, I couldn't shake the feeling that he was asking for much more than that. He was asking me to be someone I wasn't, to pretend that everything was fine when it clearly wasn't, to accept my demotion from important family member to potential liability with grace and understanding. The wedding day arrived with unseasonably warm weather and clear blue skies. I drove up to Connecticut the day before, staying at a hotel near the Hayes estate rather than accepting Victoria's offer of a room at the house. I wanted to maintain some distance, some autonomy, even if it was just the ability to retreat to my own space at the end of the night. The estate was even more impressive than I'd imagined. It was a sprawling property with manicured lawns, ancient oak trees, and a mansion that looked like it belonged in a period drama. There were already camera crews setting up, and I recognized a few faces from political news shows among the early arrivals. I'd splurged on my dress, determined to at least look like I belonged there even if I felt completely out of place. It was a deep emerald green, elegantly cut, and probably cost more than my monthly rent. I'd had my hair professionally done, and I was wearing the pearl earrings my mother had left me. If I was going to be relegated to the sidelines of my own brother's wedding, I was at least going to look good doing it. The ceremony was held in the estate's formal gardens, with rows of white chairs set up before an elaborate floral arch. I was seated near the back, in a row with some of Marcus's college friends who I vaguely recognized but hadn't spoken to in years. Not in the family section. Not anywhere close to the front. Just another guest at my own brother's wedding. I watched as Victoria's bridesmaids walked down the aisle, each one looking like they'd stepped out of a magazine spread. The daughter of a senator, wearing Vera Wang. The Ivy League lawyers in coordinating blush gowns. Victoria's sister, the television correspondent, with her perfect hair and practiced smile. I could have been up there. Should have been up there. But instead, I was in row 23, watching strangers take the place that should have been mine. Marcus looked happy when he took his place at the altar. He was wearing a custom tuxedo, his hair perfectly styled, looking more polished and put together than I'd ever seen him. He looked like he belonged in this world of wealth and power and carefully managed images. He looked like a stranger. Victoria was stunning in a dress that probably cost more than my car. The ceremony was elegant and impersonal, filled with generic vows and readings from Khalil Gibran. There was nothing that spoke to who Marcus really was, nothing that reflected the boy who'd grown up in Baltimore and loved comic books and used to make up silly songs to make me laugh. But everyone clapped at the appropriate moments, and the photographers captured every angle, and Victoria and Marcus kissed for exactly the right amount of time to look romantic without being inappropriate for the cameras. It was perfect. It was performative. It was everything Victoria Hayes wanted. And I hated every second of it. The reception was held in an enormous tent on the estate's back lawn, decorated with thousands of white roses and hanging crystal chandeliers. My table was near the back, far from the head table where the wedding party sat. I was seated with some of Victoria's distant cousins and a few people who seemed to be political associates of her father's. No one at my table knew who I was. When I introduced myself as Marcus's sister, they seemed surprised that family had been seated so far from the action. I made polite conversation about nothing, sipped overpriced champagne, and watched my brother celebrate his new life from a distance. The speeches started after dinner. Victoria's father spoke about legacy and tradition and the importance of maintaining family values. Her sister gave a perfectly practiced toast about love and partnership. The senator's daughter, Victoria's college roommate, told amusing but carefully vetted stories about their time at Yale. No one from Marcus's side spoke. Not me, not any of his friends, not anyone who had known him before he'd entered Victoria's orbit. It was like our entire history together had been erased. I excused myself during the dancing, needing air and space and a moment away from the spectacle. I found myself wandering the grounds of the estate, away from the tent and the music and the perfectly choreographed celebration. That's when I literally ran into an older gentleman who appeared to be doing the same thing I was. Escaping. "I'm so sorry," I said, steadying myself. "I wasn't watching where I was going." "Neither was I," he said with a kind smile. He was probably in his 70s, with silver hair and sharp eyes. These events can be a bit overwhelming, can't they? "That's putting it mildly," I said before I could stop myself. He laughed. "Family or politics?" "I'm sorry. Are you here for family reasons or political ones? I find it's usually one or the other at these Washington-adjacent affairs." "Family," I said. "The groom is my brother." "Ah," he said, and something knowing passed across his face. "And yet you're out here rather than in there celebrating." I didn't know what to say to that, so I said nothing. "Forgive me," he said, extending his hand. "I'm Robert Morrison. I work with Victoria's father on various projects." "Maya Chen," I said, shaking his hand. "And I'm out here because sometimes you need a break from perfection." He smiled again. "A historian's perspective, if I'm not mistaken." I looked at him in surprise. "How did you know?" "Call it an educated guess. You have that look about you, someone who sees patterns, who analyzes rather than just accepts. Plus, Victoria mentioned at dinner last week that her future brother-in-law had a sister who was a curator at the Smithsonian. Was quite pointed about how you wouldn't be in the wedding party, actually. I found that curious. "Did you?" I tried to keep my voice neutral. "Politics makes for strange bedfellows," he said thoughtfully. "And stranger exclusions. But then, I suspect you know that better than most, given your profession." We talked for nearly half an hour, standing there in the gardens while the reception continued without us. Robert Morrison turned out to be a retired political science professor who consulted for various think tanks and occasionally advised on policy matters. He was intelligent, well-read, and genuinely interested in my work at the museum. "You're doing the civil rights legislation exhibit, aren't you?" he asked. "I read about it in the Washington Post." "We are. It opens in September. I'd love to see it. That period of American history is so crucial, and yet we still haven't fully grappled with its implications." "No, we haven't," I agreed. "And some people would prefer we didn't try." He gave me a sharp look. Is that what happened with the wedding party? Someone uncomfortable with grappling. I shouldn't have answered. I should have deflected, made a joke, changed the subject. But I was tired and hurt and still angry. And Robert Morrison seemed like someone who would understand. Victoria saw some of my social media posts about historical accuracy in museum presentations. She felt they were too divisive for someone in her wedding party to have published. Too controversial. Bad optics. Ah, he said quietly. The eternal conflict between truth and palatability. Something like that. Can I tell you something, Dr. Chen? He leaned against a nearby tree. His expression thoughtful. I've been in and around politics for nearly 50 years. I've watched careers rise and fall, seen idealists become cynics, and witnessed the slow erosion of principle in favor of pragmatism more times than I can count. And I can tell you with absolute certainty that the people who are most remembered, most respected in the long run, are not the ones who played it safe. They're the ones who told uncomfortable truths, even when it cost them. That's nice in theory, I said. But it doesn't make family gatherings any easier. He laughed. No, I suppose it doesn't. But then, the easy path rarely leads anywhere worth going. We exchanged contact information before heading back to the reception. As we parted ways, he said something that stuck with me. Don't let their discomfort with truth make you doubt its value. The work you do matters, Dr. Chen. More than a picture-perfect wedding photo ever will. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe for part 2 and drop comment.